Hello and welcome. On behalf of the Southern Vancouver Island Network of the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada, I want to welcome you to part 2 of our retrospective honoring the work and legacy of Arthur Erickson, one of Canada's most celebrated architects, on the 100th anniversary of Arthur's birth, which occurred on June 14th of last year. We trust you may have had the opportunity to view part 1, aired on the Rogers Network previously, and if so, we're glad to have you back. I'm your host, John Scott, and before I introduce my co-host and one of our speakers, in fact, I just want to re-acknowledge the sponsorship and generous financial support and contribution of Chard Development, without whose support this event and program would simply not have taken place. Chard continues to build high-quality, affordable, multifamily homes in both Victoria and Vancouver, meeting the growing need for affordable housing throughout our region. Moreover, I'd also like to acknowledge the valuable organizational support that we received from both the BC chapter and the national office of the RAIC, as well as our venue host, Mr. Ben Clinton Baker, curator of the Wentworth Architecture Heritage Museum here in Victoria, and finally to Rogers Television for both the recording and the broadcasts of this event for broader public viewing. So, without further ado, I'm going to turn the mic over to my colleague Christopher Gower to reiterate our objectives with this 2-part program, and then we'll move ahead with the screening. Chris?
Thanks, John. Well, I think I'll start by noting that our intention was to complement the many celebrations in Vancouver of Arthur Erickson's 100th birthday over the last year with a Vancouver Island presentation to kind of fill in the storyline for his work in Vancouver Island, which isn't very well known. We also kind of intended to demonstrate how diverse the significance of his career is. Erickson was both a local British Columbia architect, sort of definitively Canadian icon, and also kind of a very accomplished international architect. So how we pull all that together gave us a good cause, I think, to start looking at Vancouver Island more intently. We had a diverse array of panelists to cover the ground, I guess, from different points of view. We started with Trevor Bodie as our keynote speaker, who you saw in the first presentation, and then followed with a panel with specialist interest in Erickson's career. Jeffrey Erickson is Arthur Erickson's nephew, great advocate of his work, very familiar with the details of his life as well. Nick Milkovich, you'll see his presentation today, is a longtime associate project architect with Arthur Erickson, working from the 1960s until basically the last years of Erickson's life. He was also very effective kind of working on Vancouver Island projects, in particularly the project for the Home Lumber Building. The third panelist is Stephen Wang, who's a Chinese architect who got to know Erickson in Vancouver and helped author a book on Erickson's work with Erickson's guidance, which became the first book published in China. And I think Stephen helps provide that global view on the significance of Erickson's work. And then I filled in some details on projects in Victoria which are quite significant but very little known. So I was able to kind of do some research and bring those into the discussion as well. So I guess the other intention of our presentation was to introduce Erickson's work and its great abundance to younger architects who are just getting going, to use Erickson as a great example and inspiration for their work. So all these things I think really fit in our agenda, and you'll see the presentation. John.
Thank you very much, Chris. So without further ado, we will roll the film. So the next piece is a sort of an emailed presentation by Arthur's colleague and collaborator of many years, Nick Milkovich. Nick is about 85 right now and still hard at it with the firm in Vancouver. And what he was very much involved with was the home lumber building, which many of you may know here in Victoria. It's funny because when I didn't know it existed until I drove by it and I thought, wow, what a great building. And then it turned out it was Arthur's. Who knew? So that's an example of how many people, even me, didn't know that he had done this work. So is there a way of, I'm not sure if you just grab on and we'll hear. It's basically a piece of work that Nick did for this evening. And it was recorded and edited with his staff and then sent over. So here's Nick.
So is it running? Okay. I'm pleased to join you this evening, and thank you for the invitation to be at your gathering and part of the panel. I will just do a brief intro of my adventure with Arthur Erickson. And then I will I'll talk about the project that I was involved in Victoria. You probably saw my bio. After graduating from UBC, I joined Erickson Massey in 1968. That I was hired for was a house. It was a Catton house. It was probably the only real sculptural house that Arthur has done. Most of the other ones are more linear, but it was an interesting challenge. It's on a cliffside. And as you'll see in the photos. After that, it is another, my journey continued until about 1991 when Arthur's bankruptcy ended his journey as a solo practitioner. And then we opened McLellan Architects, and we worked in a consulting framework with Arthur until he passed away. For the project, like the home lumber office in Victoria, to put it in context of the time that happened, the Simon Fraser was opened in '65. The Gordon Smith House was also finished in sort of 1965. The McLellan Model building was finishing in '68. So these are sort of prominent, recognizable works of Erickson's, and they all sort of also spoke to the home lumber office in that regard. The site was a sort of L-shaped site that where the broad side of the site in the back, when you approach it from our desk here, was the storage sheds for the lumber and the lumber yards, and the office is right on the entry corner to the site. And the office served as sort of the clearinghouse for the pickups and whatever else that's buying and pickups at the site. The structure, it's a tree structure in the home lumber office, and it was based on a 9-square plan, where the arms that branch out from the columns form the surrounding perimeter. There was 8 columns around the perimeter that held up the trees, and the centerpiece, the center of the ninth square with the center one, became a skylight and an inversion of the tree structure. And under the skylight, there was a canopy hung to dim the sunlight into the space. And it composed of a general office, the front office that was in the large space under the frame structure, and then with lower offices around 2 sides at the back, the more private offices. And the whole structure was placed on a terrazzo, black terrazzo base. It was centered on the glazing line, a 12-inch column that were approximately 18 feet at centers, and then topped with a 12-inch beam joining them. And as the columns continued up to the roof deck, they were cut off at 45 degrees. The corners were cut at 45 degrees, and to accommodate the 4 branches that touched each column, and then up to the beam structure for the roof. It also accepted the glazing line that ran through the columns, at the base, and then at the corners of the diagonals that were sitting on top of the base column. But it was a simple structure, and the model that we built was it expressed it clearly because we used a clear sheet of black plexiglass as representing the terrazzo base, and the wood structure seated on top that we modeled. It looked great together, and where the columns, the struts came down to the columns, were also, as you'll notice in the photograph, the black fittings, but they were really lights that shone, lit the ceiling, which at night made it feel jewel-like. Now, when you look at the building, it's weathered a bit, but most of the wood is really out of the weather because of the extensive overhangs, which help. And even the fascia was treated in a way that it could be replaced easily. It's floating from the main structure, and the roofing comes down behind it so that it's easily replaced and doesn't transfer any of the moisture or the weathering into the rest of the structure. When it was being done, we were had moved in to a new facility that was we designed as our office on 8th and Laurel. And it was an interesting structure. As you'll recognize, it's very similar in many ways to the home lumber office. But it was an indoor structure. It was totally interior with 4 columns, 14-inch columns that supported the roof, and the skylit around the edges. There's no windows looking out other than what was in the coffee pit. So it was an interior space, but beautifully lit. It was a wonderful workspace. And the lighting in that space was from these lanterns up above. And the mechanical system came from the rooftops systems through the ducts that you see in the photograph. And that was an inspiration, as we were surrounded by it for home lumber also, and also what an advertisement for their business. The works before home lumber, really were pointing towards what this might be, or the way it might be approached. And typically it comes out of the desire of the client. In many ways, they need a space, but also their business is lumber sales. And so what other way to treat a building that is an example of what you can do with lumber? First Epic House is concrete because the owners wanted something that's long-lasting. They're from Europe, and their houses last 300 years or so. So they wanted something that's fairly low maintenance and is durable. They weren't looking at wood that much because of maintenance, etc. And the second Epic House is steel, because that was their business. They were steel fabricators. And so they were great clients in the way that you could draw anything and they make it in that regard. So it became quite experimental, including the furniture. So it's in that same context. It's hard to view any of these pieces alone because they really are. They learn from each other, and even when you think of the law courts, it's got a frame structure, a concrete structure with almost tree-like supports that carry the roof, the steel roof and the glass above. So they're all connected in some ways. It's and you learn from each one and you store it for the next project. A great experience to have, for me to have had the opportunity to be involved in some of these things, and massive learning just by exploring. And the office was interesting in that regard, in that it was like school forever, and because Arthur was not a autocratic designer. He was more Socratic, and it was more questioning and trying to answer the questions. And so you had a significant opportunity to put ideas forward, and that was most evident probably in the law courts, because it was a large building, over 1 million square feet. The people that were leading the project were only 35 years old, which is quite young in an architect's career. So it was a great experience for all of us that were involved in that project, of putting forth ideas, our thoughts, and Arthur, and working with Arthur in that, where he had a great eye for detail and proportion, and so he's like a visiting critic to some degree, but also the collaborator at the same time. But it was never do this or do that. It was always, what do we have? Let's see how it feels, and just a process of discovery till we think it's had enough interference in what was going on, and then we just stop. I wish most architects would, when they graduate, would have the similar experience, because it was a nice way to work. Yeah, just to conclude, again, I'd like to thank you for inviting me to this celebration, and Trevor will lead you or talk more extensively in a broader way of Arthur's significance and his works. The other, just to conclude, the other projects in Victoria that were going on while I was, during my tenure in the office, was the Laurel Point Inn. I wasn't involved in it, but I saw it happening in the office. And Songhee's housing development was done at the same time. I hope my little intro has helped yours with your educational efforts, I guess, as to Arthur's work. More, and it's more about what he brought to us as professionals, and the manner that he worked that was significant. It's not just necessarily the work itself, although there are great examples of that progression, but it's I think it's the method and the involvement of it. It's not just one mind in exercising. It was a collaboration with many minds at the table, and that was the joy.
I should point out that the reason that Nick is not with us here tonight is that he's been having a bit of trouble mobility-wise, and said that he would prefer to do this rather than try to make his way over for a one-night stand in Victoria and rush back. But he also pointed, in my conversations with him, he pointed out very strongly that working with Arthur was something very important to him that never gets discussed, and he wanted to impart the sense of Arthur's generosity, collaborative nature, and interest in discovery. And I think what he said there really paints a good picture of that. So I think his words tonight are particularly poignant and helpful in understanding who Arthur was. So on that note, we're going to move on to my colleague, Chris Gower, who's going to take on a discussion about the city planner, city visionary, and in particular, the urban design work that Arthur was engaged in, and particularly in that regard, the Inner Harbor and Causeway planning for the city of Victoria. Pardon me, city of Victoria. So, Chris.
Thanks, John. So this is a bit of the underknown or unknown Arthur Erickson. We do want to point out, once again, we're focusing on Vancouver Island projects, and they're little known outside of our own realm. Arthur's so famous for his work in Los Angeles and Washington, Toronto, and Vancouver, of course. But he made a real mark in Greater Victoria as well. And I think that it needs to be kind of presented and added to the recognition of his canon. Now, I met Mr. Erickson a good number of times as a neighbor. I lived about 3 houses away from him in Vancouver. And when I was studying architecture, I never introduced myself as an architecture student. I felt way too abashed. He was so friendly and so understated. So this kind of echoes what Nick was saying. He was not an audacious or forceful. He was a very light sense of amusement. I also helped introduce him at UVic when he gave a lecture at UVic. And again, he was fun and funny and understated and humble. So it was just an amazing fellow. The other thing that's amazing about him is the breadth of the work that he did. So I'll give you a few examples here in Victoria, projects that his firm worked on. The collaborative nature as well of his work, I want to emphasize that he worked with the most talented people that they were just drawn to him like a hive of honeybees. So UVic was actually a very good example of his work on a large urban scale. The campus had been planned in the late 50s and 60s. The campus planners, Worcester Bernardi Evans from San Francisco, had the grand idea of a circular suburban ring road with a campus in the middle. The other major feature is a central quadrangle, a green quadrangle, and then clusters of sort of college campus buildings around. And the other interesting thing about the campus was the geography had been a sort of a series of farm fields. It became one of the first airports or plane fields in Victoria, had old military buildings. It had a bit of history, but it also had this wedge of nature that kind of penetrated the site. So the other prescription for UVic's early development was that the buildings would be sort of little experiments of modernism in the 60s, and that there'd be an array of individualistic designs, many of which were kind of clusters of buildings with little college spaces in the buildings, very much like the quadrangles in the classic campuses like Oxford and Cambridge, only on a modern scale. And it was a showpiece of modernism. University buildings, university development was just exploding in Canada in the 1960s, and like Simon Fraser, UVic was a new campus, and it was supposed to be a showpiece of campus planning. So it was well underway by the late 60s, and suddenly Mr. Erickson, Mr. Massey just had a terrific kind of impact with their work in Simon Fraser University, which was a celebrity triumph. There was a sort of school of campus designs across Canada done in the 60s on a gigantic scale, new campuses, I think Scarborough, York University, Trent University in Ontario, and of course the University of Lethbridge came a little later, and Simon Fraser. So Erickson Massey were brought over to kind of bring that energy and the ambition of a new campus and add that layer of planning to UVic. So you can see the area they focused in, boxed in red there, which was going to be the start of the science precinct for UVic. And this is the campus plan that Erickson Massey came up with around 1968. And you've got the original buildings here and there around the central quadrangle within the ring road. And then they saw a series of linked kind of joined buildings, kind of like a mega campus, if you will. So kind of like SFU, the buildings would sort of link and spill across the campus in a kind of organized way. So that was their concept of planning at that point. And that's exemplified in this quick planning sketch that they generated for the area around where the science building is now, just south of the quadrangle. again, set into the forest, that wedge of forest that kind of went into the campus. They used a sort of modular concept of a cluster of science buildings kind of growing into the site here. So this is another really key concept they had for planning as UVic would fill in and move ahead. And they did a whole series of sort of characterful campus sketches showing these new buildings, kind of linking. There were other buildings sort of the same idiom that were being built at the same time, the Commons building at UVic and some of the early housing. And the idea of a sort of a new concrete kind of interlinked campus development was evident in the sketches here. The presence of nature, though, in the sketches, again, this is very, very integral to Arthur Erickson's sensibility. So that's all. He's both got the grand scale and also the rich landscape qualities. So their first commission would be for the new biological sciences building, which was a component of that cluster to the south of the Maid Quadrangle. This is one of the first concept drawings, and it shows how simple the organization, the plan was. Basically, it's a series of classroom labs, all done in modules with these sort of tiered, in the corners of each classroom, there'd be a tiered structural and service bay that would come up to support the building. And then the colored area was actually some corridors and a study area that would spill out into the open, into the forest surrounding the building. So this is quite a very economical and a very logical kind of concept for the building, very, very straightforward, but very efficient at the same time. And that would quickly evolve into the early plan for the new biology building. And you can see the piers that they had at all the corners of the building now are rotated to become angular. And they would often have services for the building, and they also, we will see, became part of the structural form of the building. Here's the bays of study areas that were open to the forest. The views of the forest sort of came up into this area. These plans aren't landscaped, but you'll see in the photographs that the building had a very strong landscape relationship. The pier and lintel kind of idiom that was very much Mr. Erickson's sensibility at the time in the late 60s is evident in the kind of elevations of the building where you get strong rhythm of piers, vertical piers, and then a big capping horizontal kind of lintel across the top. So that actually expressed the services of the building, which had a penthouse system on top and then had service bays traveling between the piers. So biology buildings, of course, have to have a lot of air exchange, a lot of mechanical systems. So that was all integrated in the form of the rooftop penthouses. And here we see sketches of the building. The building's not really well known. I don't think it's hardly known at all outside of Victoria. But it was a real classic 1960s forceful modernism. Expressed, with this idea of efficiency and repetitive form and strong horizontality. But the other thing that was really powerful was the structure of the building was entirely exposed concrete. Very much in the idiom of the Erickson's and Massey firm's work at Simon Fraser and other projects they were doing. So they brought over this idea of kind of the concrete megastructure into the design of this building. And they foresaw it as a system that would extend from the original biology building into other wings and eventually create the science complex. So these are little sketch studies of the evolution of the science complex looking ahead. So here we are. They were then commissioned to execute the building, all in pour-in-place concrete. I will say the quality of the concrete work is unbelievable. No pour joints, no areas of erratic concrete aggregate. Extremely well built and well executed and thorough, but an expression of power and of the emphasis of a grand heroic kind of modernist building. Oops. And you can see the way the beam structures would project beyond towards the landscaping. The building is set in a very rich natural landscaping. When it opened just in the first year that I was beginning as an undergraduate at UVic, so I saw the building being finished, remember it being opened. I remember the discussions about it. It was definitely a very, very topical building, the early 70s. And here's some more photos of it again. It's a period piece. It is not one of the the signature buildings on the campus, but it's a presence for sure. And it is dated in many ways. The wood infill up in the ends of the beams is kind of its era. It's copper naphthenate, treated cedar siding, and so on. A lot of kind of politically incorrect elements, I guess, of the era, and they're still in place there. And of course, it's a laboratory building. So here we see the laboratory activities projecting from the building. It's full of of the biology sciences. It's been a very effective building for that department, which is probably one of the most prominent departments at UVic. It has been. Now, Erickson and Massey, the building was controversial, but Erickson and Massey left a kind of legacy for the planning for the science pressing, which is down this corner of the campus. And a number of other projects were built that kind of picked up on the theme of the concrete, kind of campus building. These are some buildings I worked a little bit with Terry Williams on, the University Computer Science building. But the legacy of the layout of the buildings and the kind of form of the side of the campus is, I guess the impetus came from the Erickson Massey work. However, the building was controversial. Many people thought it was severe for UVic. Many of the earlier buildings at UVic had been very sort of modern, craftsy scaled buildings with a lot of warm materials. And so there became quite a bit of controversy about the architecture of the building. And at the same time, there was a lot of regard for the architectonic kind of power of the building. The other thing that I think is, counterbalances the criticisms is the building was designed to fit into this forested, heavily mature treed wedge that projected into the university. It was very much intended to be seen in groves of vertical trees. That's how I remember it when it first opened. Surrounded with vertical Douglas fir and arbutus trees, close to the building. So there was a really strong relationship to nature. And I guess a good appreciation of the building is it really is an expression of reason and systematic thought and analysis and measured modularity set against nature. So it's a kind of expression of science in its way, examining the surrounding qualities of the natural landscape, I think. And it's a monument. So this is a kind of forgotten example of their buildings, but it's worth a good look. But just to show the diversity and the scope and range of Mr. Erickson's abilities and his firm's kind of interests, we can jump so quickly to a different scale and a different sensibility. In the 1970s, 1973, Erickson's firm were hired to do a study for Victoria's Inner Harbor, urban design study, and you need to pursue copies of that study. It's a textbook example of an urban design examination of a complex urban area, and it's so well prepared. Its concepts and sort of originating organizations extremely well presented in the writing, and also all the collaborators are so well regarded and presented in the document. The talented people to work with Arthur Erickson were they were being elevated and inspired by him, and they were contributing thoroughly. So it's a great urban design study. It's still a classic, very thorough, good analysis of the harbor of its times. In 1973, the harbor was still largely industrial, and he was looking ahead to it becoming urbanized and becoming a civic kind of place. Part of his analysis was to divide the harbor up into different areas of character zones, and a lot of this is still with us. This study is so sweeping and inspired and visionary, that we are still kind of wrestling with little pieces of this vision that he put out. So dividing the harbor up into character areas and having a plan and a vision for each of them. This is his plan for the first area, which is the inner basin of the inner harbor, which he saw as what he called the central activity basin, just facing the Empress and the legislature. He saw it as a more captive area. It would have a series of pedestrian causeways surrounding it, an amphitheater on the north end, more elaborate terrace walkways leading down to the waterfront from the legislature and the Empress, and then a captive kind of dam and bridge that would actually capture the tidal movement of this basin of water. So the tides would not go up and down, they'd stay at a single level. So there was never going to be a low tide in the basin. The next pressing area, again, these things are all still with us, was the area that we now call the Ship Point and the area adjacent to Old Town. The Old Town report had come out just a few years before the study and was well referred to, well referenced in the study, and that Erickson's firm's ideas about how the harbor would relate to the Old Town were quite sympathetic. The scale of buildings was low and so on, and the buildings would kind of terrace down towards the water, and also the walkways and the view lines would kind of penetrate through the site. So in this area of the harbor, he first saw, here we go, Maritime Museum, Undersea Gardens, Harbor Galleria, Fisherman's Market. So it was a very, very multi-purpose view of the harbor, very thorough. And then another considered area right now is the area on the south side of the harbor, which is where the coho and the catamaran to Seattle run from. And again, he had the idea of an international port, but also with parks, walkways, a steep lane base, a whole cluster of integrated planning. So the planning was so thorough and well integrated. The next area was up near the Johnson Street Bridge, where Old Town was sort of cascading into what he called a pedestrian muse, Old Town shopping muse on the harbor, in scale with the older buildings sort of up the slope. The Songhees area, he had the idea at this stage, 1973, of it primarily residential use, also framing the harbor from that side. You can see the condition of the harbor at the time of the study. It still had large industrial buildings and sort of underused wharf areas all surrounding the harbor. It was really dead for pedestrian access except right around the causeway itself. And his idea was to enliven all the foreshore around the harbor. And here it is sort of summarized in a quick sketch, which looks into that tidal basin. It looks through the terracing buildings sort of surrounding the Old Town area. Unfortunately, the Reed proposal, which had been originally for 3-point towers, pencil towers at the end of the end of Fort Street, had evolved into sort of a simulation of Toronto City Hall. So that was a given that he had to adopt in the plan. And he did the firm did very elaborate, detailed concept sketches of the relationship of the surrounds, the public areas, to the water and to the harbor itself. It's a textbook example of an urban design plan. And the emphasis on terracing buildings, the emphasis on different water elements. I didn't mention the Maritime Museum and the Undersea Garden. I did mention them, but the expression of actual marine and aquatic uses kind of being focused on the harbor or sort of run through the plan as well. And this was a sketch through the Galleria, and then also part of the architectural model showed some concepts of the Maritime Museum fronting onto the harbor. And this is a view of the overall model. The city had this model for decades. It's disappeared now, but it was very inspiring and challenging for Victoria. It was full of quite rich kind of urban design concepts for buildings and for public spaces, for landscaping, for lighting. It's it's a textbook study. It should really be published. I haven't seen many projects on this with this level of subtlety in any city. And the landscape and lighting was given a lot of specialized attention as well. So it was visionary and very thorough and probing and bold. So there were reactions. There were criticisms as well and also compliments. course. This for Victoria. This was an earth-shaking kind of examination. Peter Pollan, the mayor of the time, had instigated the study. I think he became quite close with Erickson, but there became quite a bit of to and fro on, well, can we really do all this? What about a captive water basin? And to all his credit, Arthur Erickson listened to everything, and the plan kept evolving. So the captive water basin eventually became just a water basin with a pedestrian bridge framing it. And there were other things that kind of evolved with the plan. So it's an interactive dialogue with the community. And there were lots and lots of great discussion. It was very colorful and lively. And Victoria, it's an honor for Victoria to have had the project of this quality. And I think it should inspire us all. And he did actually manage to convince Progress to step ahead for Victoria. And so the focus came eventually into creating the lower causeway areas around the Inner Harbour Basin. So that's what could be afforded to be done, and made a lot of sense. It was not an entirely original idea. The idea of a lower causeway had been proposed in 1958 for the BC Centennial, when they had harbour sort of marine battles depicted in the harbour as part of the centennial celebrations. And planners at the time said, wouldn't it be great if we had a lower walkway causeway? So the idea was already around, but the wonderful thing is that it was executed so well through Arthur Erickson and his office. It's a very refined piece of design, really complementary to the upper causeway. Norm Hodson was one of the young architects working on the project. Again, Arthur shared credit with all the younger architects working on the project, as well as intook their ideas and enriched the quality of the project. And also, there were continuous reviews, and it was an evolving kind of project. It was not a stamped, fixed kind of proposal just to charge ahead. And so over the years, it's evolved a little bit. The portion of the causeway in front of the legislative building was a later addition, and Erickson sort of compromised there. He had a set of terraces and tiered passageways down to the harbour, but Victorians wanted to retain the Welcome to Victoria sign, which I think is still there. So he was tamed a little bit, but he was so visionary, and he's so uplifting for the city. And he would be commissioned a little later to do a study for the Songhees Peninsula, which is kind of an outgrowth. And his concept for the Songhees was a hilltop. They had examples of Italian hilltop towns. And essentially they saw a cluster of taller buildings at the top, arrayed into lower buildings which would fan out towards the waterfronts below. And at the time, in the early 80s, there was a lot of concern for housing. So a lot of these projects were the co-op housing projects, and also seniors' towers on top of the hilltop. So the housing topic is not a new one that we are dealing with. And the causeways, the co-op buildings were some of the first buildings kind of built, and also the seniors' tower on top. Again, this was controversial. It was seen as perhaps a bit too monolithic and so on. But it was a vision, and I think the quality of this, particularly this concrete built tower, is pretty high. Again, it's incredible concrete work. Plus, it's toned. If you look at it closely, it's all got colored, toned, concrete finishes. Very high quality. All to the standard of all the work from his office. And then, of course, here we are with the end result, which I think is a world-class urban waterfront in Victoria. It's probably due a little bit of maintenance. I think full restoration of the paving areas along the causeway edges. The tile work was what they called a quartzite or a slate tile, much of which has kind of begun to disappear. It all needs to be restored well, I think. I'm concerned that renovating it and giving up the elegance and the sympathy of the design it should be challenged. Similarly, the upper causeway, the walkways and so on are so long overdue proper paving. But Erickson, there's no doubt, the quality of his work and the quality of his collaborative kind of philosophy is so evident in this project. So And the beauty of the night lighting is something to behold too. So that's, again, a great city visionary, Mr. Erickson, and we were so privileged to have this contribution to our city. So.
So we're on to our last. Thank you very much, Chris. That was actually really well done too. Our next presenter and final presenter of the evening is Mr. Stephen Wang, architect and also a collaborator in a different way, really, with Arthur Erickson. They got together around, from what I understand, Arthur's maybe frustration or interest in reaching out to the Chinese market, the market in China for his design work. As we all know, he was a huge student of Oriental design, particularly design work in Japan. But he, from what I understand, wasn't making much headway in China. And Stephen and he got together, and Stephen basically wanted to work with him to prepare a book of his work that could be used to basically interest Chinese developers in his design work and open the doors to Erickson overseas. And he also worked with Stephen with regard to the Laurel Point Inn. So Stephen has had a long history working with Arthur as well, but from a different perspective than what you've just heard. So Stephen, come on up and just open the doors to Arthur again as an international architect, still striving to build his business, if you will.
Okay, first, I'm not working sorry, I'm never working actually architecture work with him.
Oh, no, I didn't mean that.
Yeah, so, okay.
Collaboration.
So, about 2004, the Chinese publisher talked to me and said, hey, when I just arrived to Canada, and said, maybe you should, find some Canadian architect. You write something about it. And I said, hey, how about Arthur Erickson, right? So they heard about Arthur Erickson. He has strong influence from Asia, and from Japan, from everything. So they asked me, how can we discover something like that, right? So we choose some of these houses. That's this thing's very short and sweet. It's talking about from foreigner with a different background architect, how we think about Arthur Erickson. It's not complete, just a few points. Maybe next time you saw Arthur's building, you have a different viewpoint. Okay, think about that, 1950s, right? So predominant buildings we see from next room is like a U building, you have a foundation, you have a building sit on there. So that could be everywhere, right? So, but from this building is a fiber house, Jeffrey gave it to me. So I asked Erickson, and said, what do you think about this one, right? He said the size is different. We should build for this. Every building, every sign, every topographic is different. We should build something. So I asked him, so how do you get the idea? And he said he got it from a Chinese-Japanese garden and said the secret to build something is you put something there, you think about the things that grow up there, that fit the topographic. It's not like, hey, I have the building I put there, the fitting everywhere. So the secret, he said, is high at the end. For example, you see the building, this one, you can see things like a building going this way, going that way. So that's quite a bit different, just like Trevor talked about the landscape, right? In 1950s, 40s, when he started architecture, so the North America is the transfer from a wall loading barrier system to the post beam systems. So Arthur, that time, do a lot of revolutionary things to study the functions of the windows and the walls. This just give you examples. Do you think the windows is not only bring the sunlight in, also that could be part of decoration, right? You look outside, that's the most efficient, very nice decoration of it. It could be a painting on the wall, right? Could be. So that changes. So that's top of this, Jeffrey talked about the top, these things on the top. When the sunlight changes, actually they're moving around this house. So the things all changes. So I asked Erickson, this is, why are you doing things there? He said that kind of communication between the sunlight, between this design, between everything, this slight communication between the users and the architect. So that probably the things we call this art. That's why people go inside to get moved, get touched, get said, oh, this is a very nice building. So I speak that to Abraham Roganek, which is a university professor at UBC. He's laughing at it. And he told me he took students going there, see the house. Every year, students actually get amazed by how the design, they walk into the glass. So 1 year, they got hurt so much, they have to send them to the emergency room. So when Arthur, that kind of generation, they said, okay, when we challenge the function of the wall and the windows, what can we get, right? So Asian, China and Japan use the post-beam system for over 2,000 years. That's the Bijosan's house. That's two. This is outside. This is the inside. The next door is a traditional Suzhou garden. The Suzhou garden is 300 years older than this one. So they basically just say, hey, we don't need this wall. We want to get something outside, look outside. Can we select the view we want to see? That's Trevor talked about. We create all this idea for your own purpose. We look at it. Think about it. So this is Japanese maple. They can change the color in the winter, in the summer, everything's different. This is another interesting story, is Museum of Anthropology. So this is going to the entrance, the both sides. You can see the natural sunlight come from the top, have come to this exhibitioner. So next door, again, that's in 1971, just a short time they visit China with Trudeau Sr. So the funny story, I bring it up to Arthur and said, hey, how do you think about that? My publisher believe you may have some connections. And he told me a story. He said he went away and he come back. The skylight in there, the roof was poured concrete, was totally blocked. And he said, no, that's not what we want. Actually, he asked the people to cut this skylight on the left side, left the natural sunlight come in direction on this one. So, I mean, there is connections. So this is another pictures we show. So the funny stories is, I do some studies in McGill University about this kind of connections. And actually my instructor seems like a little bit disappointed and said, this is too simple connections. I think you compare, when we transferred from the wall bear loading system to the post-beam loading systems, you're comparing 2,000 years history and maybe 100 years history, right? So regardless, it's not because who is smarter, whatever it is, there's some of the references. So then I went to the library, McGill University. I found the Canadian architecture book. Somebody handwriting there and said, just under the Erickson things and said, there are many modern Western architecture of his generations get the influence from Asian because of the systems. But actually many of them denied it. I speak that to Arthur, he thinks that's really interesting story. This is a project we bring, Jeffrey talked about that. So when In 1998, I was in China. I was working for the government, the local government. There is a design competition in Shenzhen area. It's an exhibition hall, right? So the first time I heard about Arthur is somebody said, Arthur really wants to participate in the design competition instead of being the judge panel. The first time I see is very, very interesting. He looked at devoted his whole life on architecture instead of enjoy his fame and everything. Really moves me. People working so hard. Thank you.
This gives you an idea of one of the larger international projects that Arthur did in China. He did lots. It's very futuristic, and we're hoping that we can feature this in the Arthur Erickson 3D City. It's been something evolving over time. Recently, of course, people have been working in 3D and so we're able to continue and bring these projects easily into such a model. These are just some of the views from it. Very adventurous submission. He didn't win this one, unfortunately. I can't remember the exact circumstances, but to use that word visionary again, I think that would apply. These were actually very early 3D modeling exercises done in his office. Just to give you a little bit of scope of that particular project. Ah, yes. Okay. So just picking up from where Stephen left off, this is the book that he published in China, and I helped him a little bit with some of the images for it. And we went on a couple of trips photographing. This is the Bagley Wright House in Seattle, which held the largest private collection of American modern art. Virginia Wright was a Blodell, actually, and Arthur, of course, knew the McLellans and Blodells. McLellans, of course, have a fantastic place in Qualicum Beach. The Museum of Glass, another one of Stephen's great photographs. We went down there and saw it day and night, and he went to the Bank of Canada building in Ottawa, photographed that, and the California Plaza in Los Angeles, huge urban development project. We're just touching on some of these. One of my favorite shots of the lobby of the Roy Thompson Hall, one of the few areas that was actually completed as they had proposed it. So we have a few more images here from the family collection. I went to China to photograph some of the projects. This one is in Tianjin. It's called TIDA, the Tianjin Economic Development Area. Right now, and next door to it now is one of the tallest buildings in the world. It was a cultural center, shopping, and it featured the hotel, which I showed in the last image, an interior shot. Weihai, where they did the master plan for the harbor, and the cultural center. Of course, these projects weren't finished by Arthur. So we have them in what's called conceptual design on his website because, well, he wanted a section for conceptual design separate from the others because he didn't complete them. But if you see the early models, you realize that all of the ideas, where all of the ideas came from for these. This is in Dalian, the cultural center there, the library on one side, the full concert hall on the other side, huge plaza for public events. Just another shot of the library. And just outside of Shanghai, in Kunshan, a yacht club he did there. It wasn't finished on the exterior the way he wanted. The builder decided to got a good deal on a very dark stone for the whole exterior, and so we had a very difficult time getting any shots of the exterior because it was all wrong. This one was completed very much the way he had thought it would be for Etisalat. He did 2 towers for them in the Middle East, in the United Arab Emirates. This one's in Abu Dhabi, and my brother did a lot of the steel work on this project. They had these giant domes on top for housing all of the telecommunications, radars, satellite dishes, all of that. They wanted it all, and that idea carried on, and they kept doing Etisalat buildings by other architects after Arthur. After he closed his office, copying this idea. This is the one in Dubai. Again, my brother did a lot of work on this, all the exterior stonework. This is the Kuwait oil sector complex, right on the waterfront, huge complex with 3 different office buildings, because there was 3 different companies, all combined into one massive complex. And another waterfront project, the San Diego Convention Center, which has been added to, again, as much by another architectural firm, sort of copying what Arthur did here with the original part of it. So this view, for example, you don't get this anymore because there's another building attached to this end of it. It used to be quite open up there, and it was fantastic space, still is. In fact, they draw Comic-Con there every year, and many other very, very well-publicized events. So it's right on the waterfront. It just totally brought the city to life down on the waterfront, which didn't really have a presence there before. Similarly, in Toronto, at Queen's Quay, Arthur did the first development there, which was quite a large development. Only one building ended up being built. It almost looks out of place on its own. But it did, say, hey, it's a celebration of being on the waterfront and what you would do there and how you'd give everybody good views. In this case, everybody got a solarium as well. And the ballet school also is on the ground floor. This is another one of Stephen's photographs. And that leads us right into this building, which is around the same time. And this was the Erickson wing, as it's called now, added to the original hotel. And detailed, it's very, all of these waterfront buildings pick up on the nautical theme. Sometimes it almost seems like there's a ship at berth there. And in this case, I think he also picked up on the old conservatory look, which you had. One of my earliest memories of coming to Victoria was the beautiful botanical gardens behind the Empress. And this sort of carries that idea a little bit in the dining room area, as you can see in the ceiling. And right around the same time, he was doing this, attaching the swimming pool to the fantastic mansion in Shaughnessy called the Hollies. And he didn't want to, it was a very traditional building. He didn't want to try and implement any modernism on it. Instead, he picked up the old idea of the conservatory and took advantage of that. Here's just a couple more pictures of Laurel Point Inn. And this is a photograph I took earlier this year from the building immediately behind it. which I'm working on with my brother now of the finishes, and they want an upgrading of that. It was done by the same architect that did the original Laurel Point Inn, with the combination of the brick and the white trim, and he had to try and tie it in to that look and imitate it a little bit with the. So he was always paying homage to the surroundings, whatever it is you're trying to work with, and he didn't mind working with masonry or steel or wood, and that's the end of my part. Thank you very much.
So I just wanted to make an observation, which you may have caught. Arthur actually managed to realize his terraced building style, not only in San Diego, but in Queens Quay. And it's sort of a reflection of what he was trying to do on the Victoria waterfront. And I guess actually didn't realize it here quite the same extent, but he's been able to impart that same aesthetic and form factor in his other projects internationally. So fantastic imagery, though. There's really great projects internationally that he managed to get involved in. So that wraps up our formal presentations. Thank you very much to our 4 panelists. Due to our difficulty with time, what I would say is if anybody has any comments to make or questions to ask, please feel free to do so. Unfortunately, you're going to have to come up to the mic so that it gets recorded. And again, be careful what you say. But come on up if you have any questions or comments to make of interest, because we'd certainly like to have them as part of the presentation for the television as well.
Thanks to Trevor. Yeah, and to John and Stephen, Jeffrey. We've had a really excellent evening, I think. So we're probably going to retire after a bit of yakking here with Trevor prompting us. It will maybe retire in about 5-10 minutes. Sure.
Yeah, it's just a chance if anybody wants to dialogue, given what you've seen. Not many left, but there they are. Minus Stephen.
Yeah, our time frame spilt a bit, as inevitably it would with the subject material.
Well,
So
that, it's impossible for architects to stay within a time frame, generally speaking.
So I think what we wanted to do this evening was to look at global Arthur Erickson, but also local Arthur Erickson, show that he was a great BC architect, that somehow became a great international architect. And maybe it's an enigma how all that happened. I'll turn to our friend,
Well, I
Trevor.
think for the first time tonight, Jeff, I hadn't realized how much was actually built in Japan, or in China, mainland China.
I just touched on it.
Yeah, and I haven't seen most of the ones you showed tonight. Now, most of those were during the Architectura era, is that fair to say? Not many were designed on Laurel Street.
Well, no, they were mostly done with Nick.
After the separation, okay. Right, okay. Because it's interesting, a lot of attention on his Middle Eastern work, but so little of that got built. It seems to be more was built in China, but somehow we never heard about it, or Nick didn't promote it, or Arthur didn't.
No.
Yeah.
And there's other buildings, certainly in the Middle East lots that people don't know about. Some of them we don't have very good images of. And then there was, speaking of master planning, there was endless master planning projects. And there's someone in our audience here who had a lot of firsthand experience with those. Architect Richard Blagborn, who's with us here this evening, and a real treat to see him. And he traveled to Saudi Arabia many times and other parts of the Middle East, working on these fantastic projects. I thought you were going to show me your pictures of the ones with Saddam Hussein. That would be lost.
Richard, you'll be interested. I'm talking to Ellen Bell and other people. I've been involved with the Aga Khan Award for architecture for a long time. They've built a beautiful new hall at the Edmonton Garden, the Aga Khan Garden, called the Diwan. So I've proposed the Aga Khan Award people, if they'll fund it, we have a 1-day or 2-day symposium on the Middle Eastern works, built and non-built. In other words, what better place? We can go see the Dyed House nearby, and the Edmonton Ismaili community has got deep pockets. So we're trying to get that going. We definitely want you involved with that, Richard and Alan and the others who are still around from that era. We do it because, in my view, Erickson is one of the first true global architects, okay, who really practiced not just multiple countries, but multiple continents, Middle East, Europe, Canada, so on. And I think to look for people who did that before him, you have to go back to people like Baker and Edward Lutyens, who worked in South Africa and India, et cetera, and started a kind of idea of a global practice. Even to some degree, Rattenbury, with his very significant, a BC career than going back to England. So I think this is very interesting. I think Arthur, in so many ways, was ahead of his time, and he really saw no boundaries. And as a Western Canadian, thought as much about Japan as he did as Rome or New York. So stay tuned. It won't happen before fall of next year, but we'd love to get you involved, and we'll correspond with you and anyone else. I saw the Kuwait building at an Aga Khan seminar, the oil ministry, and it is a very fine building. It stands out. It is the best tower in contemporary Kuwait. Apparently it was finished or realized by other firms. I don't know what the arrangement was, but it still is a very significant, a really interesting design. So we're just scratching the surface. Similarly, I forgot that Erickson was involved with the campus plan of UVic. It was always frustrating to him. I know he spoke about it as this huge missed opportunity. In other words, they didn't quite get it, or they didn't give it enough attention, whatever happened. And I find the same thing about the buildings on campus. They are not of the first rank. I put them with the hospitals, like the Saskatoon Hospital, and those. They're functional, but they're not of the first order. I'm amazed how many buildings I saw the first time tonight.
Yeah, I think what impresses me is, as Trevor's just saying, is that Mr. Erickson was so cosmopolitan and so open to other cultures. I mean, and somehow that also came from British Columbia. I think the multiculturalism of British Columbia, the Oriental influence and the gold rushes, all those things were kind of in the background a little bit. And also the exoticness of the landscapes in BC. And that flowed, from starting very locally, it flowed out quite naturally to him to an international kind of outlook and international involvement. And I think, as Trevor's saying, there's only a handful of other architects, modern architects, who have ever accomplished that amount of internationalism. Don Lovell was a campus planner at UVic.
Oh, yeah. So Trevor's thrown down the gauntlet about Arthur Erickson's plan. And it was the success of Simon Fraser. Martin Sager's here, so he can jump in when I go astray. But it was the success of Simon Fraser that caused the Board of Governors to hire Erickson Massey, engage them for about 3 years, and quietly didn't call back words to Bernard Emmons. And there was disillusionment with the plan because the circular road hadn't been completed. Simon Fraser was getting the publicity. And they did a number of iterations, and the final plan, if I say it was a final plan, when it was presented to the Board of Governors, had one thing that caused the board to say, we're not sure. And that was the linkage of buildings with some type of covered walkway, which you saw in the Chris Gowers, because they said that Victoria had a lot of rain. And the board said, we don't get as much rain as Burnaby. So there was parts of the plan that were incorporated, and some of that was a series of ponds that were shown on the campus. And in fact, the University Club is located in an area that's the source of Bowker Creek, and so that water was captured as a water feature. Another aspect of the plan that wasn't accepted was the use of concrete because it lacked color. One of the founding principles from Ursa Bernardi Emmons was the use of landscape to hold the campus together. And another one was the use of local architects. No universal design like Western Ontario that might have collegiate Gothic and limestone or sandstone buildings. So the architecture there, although Trevor might say is not what's published a lot, it's a reflection of the local architects and the day. So it's rather a collection of architectural styles. And so there are a number of notable buildings. The problem is, if you look at a book on Canadian architecture, they don't publish too much west of Ontario. And so some of the work there that Chris has done and others showcasing some of our local architects doesn't seep out of the BC borders. So I didn't, it's Trevor's fault. He threw down the gauntlet. I had to say something. There was a couple other good ideas that Erickson put together that have formed their way into some of the changes on the plan. But by 1970, they had invited Don Emmons back on campus with his acolyte, Larry Cannon, and they continued to do consulting. And as well as having Don Vaughn, who is the landscape coordinating architect that's maintained. Now, I won't make any comments about the current buildings on the campus.
Well, 2 points. Planners have great difficulty, it seems, with the Western Canadian climate. Charles Moore told me the amazing story about the design of the University of Calgary campus. I don't know if you've heard this, John. The campus planner was a California specialist called Louis Dumonte, and he did nothing but campus designs all over the continent. And he did UC Santa Cruz, so Charles Moore had dealt with him there and fought with him quite a bit. Louis Dumonte came up to Calgary 3 times. Visit 1 in January, Chinook. Okay, the Canadian kids were out playing Frisbee in their shorts. He was freezing in his parka, and he thought, these Canadians are so tough. Well, then it went down to 30 below for a couple of weeks, and he arrived in late February, once again in a Chinook, and looked at them, and they just loved being outside, these crazy Canadians. So he went back and did the campus plan for University of Calgary with separate buildings with no all-weather connection between any of the buildings. And no tunnels underneath, and no bridges. And the idea is that you would waltz between buildings, you know, enjoying the climate. And then what they had to do is they had to retroactively build connection between all the buildings, which confounded all the urban design and pedestrian flows of the campus. You know, it's really a mess, and has remained so. And even worse, our classmate, Dave Edmonds, then designed the building, which housed the architecture building, which terminated the whole the urban design plan. It was meant to be a bull facing south to the sun, and he sealed off the south end of the bull. So again, campus plans are hard, and it's hard to get a vision with a committee, and that's happened in many places, yeah. But the one, just a quick note on Songhees. Arthur really regretted what had happened at Songhees, because he thought that the least important parts were built. They didn't understand the plan, the change of governments, and then he thought it would be the Granville Island of Victoria, would be a vital mixed retail community, et cetera, and it fell apart. So he had a bit of a bitter taste in his mouth about Victoria because of that.
Yeah, just maybe another comment about you, Vic. I was an undergraduate through all those years, and I was certainly impressed with the Cunningham building. One of the things that impressed me was the interplay with nature in the building, and I'm afraid that's something that UVic is letting kind of slide. They're taking out the wetlands, and the trees are thinning out and so on. So that really powerful interplay of the surrounds, the environmental surrounds of the building are being diminished as the campus crowds in, and that's a factor throughout the campus. And Terry, I don't know if you have any thoughts on. Terry did a lot of planning for UVic.
Not this evening.
Not this evening, yeah. So
If we buy you a drink.
I will not fault Mr. Erickson's ambitions and vision and aspirations. I think at UVic, I think it's what he's left is really monumental. And yeah, I think the scale of the big concrete expression was a bit hard to digest in Victoria, but it's a monument of its era that's worth a look.
Just a footnote for something that went before. What happened between the Philberg House in Comox and the Dyke House? Okay, what happened? Well, the simple version is Arthur did his trip to Japan. Canada Council funded trip to Japan, which confirmed all of his interests in landscape and so on, and a more stripped down architecture. As you know, Philberg is very decorative and very Mediterranean in his feeling. So his eye changed in Japan. Dyke House was the first expression of the new one, and then it's taken even further with Smith too. So it shows you how well-timed travel for a young architect's career can make a huge difference.
So I have a funny story about the Philberg House. My wife grew up with her 4 sisters next door, and they were a little farm family on, quite local. And they looked over the hedge and watched this thing come into being. And their dad was a little house builder, and he had a building supply company. All of the Comox Valley talked about the glass house. And the Philberg and his partner would invite Barbara over for tea. So she had tea. Little farm girls would have the glorious, they were kind of aspiring, they'd have glorious English teas in this modernist kind of environment. So she still talks about it.
Yeah, so we're at 10:30, and I just want to make a couple of comments. It strikes me listening. Oh, did that disappear from me? I guess it did. Okay. What I was going to say was that I think what tonight has done, and I think you can see it, is really, well, what it has been is an intersection of influences from different players that have had a different experience with Arthur's history. But in that set of intersections, we've discovered things that we didn't know. I mean, what we were talking about just a minute ago, the work in China, we had talked about this in setting this evening up. And just like Trevor, we were not aware of the significance of Arthur's work in China. So tonight's been a discovery of that. We were certainly not aware of some of the projects that Jeffrey's put together. And also, it's just been really interesting to see what you and your brother continue to do to celebrate his work. And I'm really excited about what comes of all of this as it continues to unfold. So it's been great having you all. Sorry that we lost one member, Stephen. But anyway, I hope you've all enjoyed what the discussion has been. Lots of interesting ideas, lots of interesting profiles, if you will. And I guess I'll wrap it up.
I'd just like to compliment you all. Cities your size across the country, like Saskatoon, Regina, London, Ontario, are not pulling off this kind of event. You know what I mean? Victoria's particularly rich in intellectual resources. A lot of smart people live here, and a lot of people who care about the natural and the built environment. So keep it going. And the Ducasty show, all the things that have been happening here,
that's true.
Are the top drawer. And the trouble is, even in Vancouver, I don't hear about them until they're over. But that's another fish to fry. But good on you. And just finally, some of us are going to see a prominent new house in Oak Bay tomorrow midday, having lunch around 1 at Laura Point if anybody's hungry. And then the Jawls have very kindly allowed a number of us to go see the lumber yard, Arthur's construction that's on the lead of it. I've never been there. And Jeff, I think you're coming with this? No. Maybe, you gotta go back. Anyway, if anyone's interested, come talk to me about that. Numbers are limited for both. And finally, and most important, if there's any hardcore Scotch drinkers still around, we could do an afterburn, Terry. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for coming.